Hello, welcome to my professional development on classroom assessment. My name is Ashley Person. I've been a teacher for 4 years in first and second grade. I'm currently working as a literacy coach in two elementary schools, and I'm also pursuing my master's degree in curriculum and teaching at Teachers College. Today, this professional development is going to teach you all about classroom assessments. We're going to be focusing in on formative and summative assessments, and specifically how to create authentic assessments in our classroom. My hope is that you're not watching this alone because the best kind of learning is going to take place if you are in a community of other educators, administrators, instructional assistants, other people who can help you brainstorm and collaborate on these ideas. We're going to jump right in. I do have throughout this professional development, some videos that we're going to be watching, also some interactive experiences, some points when I'm going to ask you to stop the video, turn and talk to a partner, because they're really things that I want you to start discussing and bring up in collaboration with other educators. So let's get started. We're going to start with an awesome video about baking school. And in my mind, this is a pretty good representation of what real world assessments or authentic assessments are like. So let's get started. I'm going to put it to the place where I want it to start.
Here are the ingredients that you need to make the milk chocolate ganache. Heavy cream, kosher salt, milk chocolate discs, and unsalted butter. I'm not heating up the ingredients together, I'm only heating the cream. If I did it together, chocolate's very temperature sensitive and I risk scorching it or burning it. Also add my little bit of salt. All right, bringing this over to the stove. So I'm gonna take this off once I start to see little bubbles around the sides. Cream will also boil over. You don't want that to happen. See, it's starting to bubble up just a little bit around the edges. Okay, so I'm gonna use the heat from the cream to gently melt the chocolate. And I am going to let this sit for several minutes. Okay, I'm going to start stirring. I think everything's had a chance to melt. So this will all come together into a beautiful, sort of like semi-liquid mixture with a really glossy, smooth consistency.
It's like chocolate milk.
I love chocolate milk. The mixture is completely smooth, but it's still warm. Only once it's room temperature, I'm going to incorporate my butter, which is also room temperature. So a good rule of thumb for a lot of pastry kind of preparations is you want things to either be exactly the same temperature or vastly different temperatures. It's important that for these things to incorporate evenly, that they're both thoroughly room temp. The ganache has cooled down a lot. You can see it's starting to thicken a lot. I'm at that stage where I want to whip in the butter. I don't want to put this in a blender or even in a stand mixer. I like the control of a hand mixer so I can really keep an eye on it because there's a very specific endpoint that I want to take this to. I know that I'm done not only when it's a bit thicker, but the surface texture will turn a little bit so that shine will go away and it'll turn matte. It's quite a dramatic transformation from that very liquidy ganache that we formed in the beginning. So good. So this came together really quickly with very few ingredients. We had our chocolate in a bowl and poured the hot cream over top, let everything sit until the chocolate was melted. I stirred it until smooth and then let everything come up to room temperature. Then I added the butter and whipped it together until it held soft peaks.
So, right now, I want you to stop this video. I want you to talk with someone. Hopefully, you're doing this with someone, or just reflect on how you would assess this lesson. So, stop this video right now and think about how would you assess this lesson? Just want to think about some of the things that I was thinking about while watching this video. Now, we could assess if someone's able to do this by giving them like a multiple choice question that says, like, write in the answer, find the answers of the things that you would need to create this ganache. Or we could have someone memorize the steps. But does that really reach what we're trying to do? The end goal is for you to be able to make the ganache. So, an authentic assessment would be having someone actually make the ganache. Can you take what you learned from the lesson and apply it to real world skills to be able to make the ganache? Now, I want you to remember this video as we go throughout this presentation today. I know that this is not something that we're going to be doing in our classroom, but it's just a great reminder that in real life, we're we're learning so many different skills. And usually in real life, our assessment is like actually doing the skill. So actually making the ganache when you're learning how to drive, right? You actually drive as your assessment. So we really want to make sure as an educator, as a teacher, that whatever skill or content knowledge that we are teaching our students, that they should be able to actually apply that skill. So, when we are talking about authentic assessments, we are talking about real things, either a real product or applying a real skill to that. And that's the most important thing I want us to think about today. How can we bring all these assessments, all these skills, all this content knowledge that we're teaching our students, how can we make it real to their lives?
So, when I'm talking about authentic assessments, my ideas are coming from this quote here from Teaching to Change the World. It says, Linda Darling Hammond, among others, proposes that assessment should be based on meaningful performances in real world contexts. Let's just stop right there because this is so important. What it's saying is that in order for an assessment to be authentic, it needs to be based in the context of real world, of students' real world, or their real world in the future. So, how can we connect the skills and the content knowledge that we're teaching our students with the real world, with real life? How are they going to use these skills in the real world? How are they going to use this content knowledge in the real world? And that these performances should be so closely entwined as to be often inseparable from the curriculum itself. I remember in school when we would learn all these amazing things, and it would be like, okay, we need to stop and take a test now. It shouldn't feel like that. Assessment shouldn't feel like they're detached. There's something else. It's just our way for like us to spit out the information that we already know. Assessments should just feel like it's a part of the learning process. It's just a way for us to use those skills. Okay, now we've gained all these skills and information. Now let's use them how we're going to use them in the real world. So, for the baking lesson that we just watched, right? We're watching that video, we're learning all this information. We're probably going to need to practice it a few times. You know, I could have my video up and replay it as I'm trying it, but we don't want to just stop and say, okay, here was our lesson, now let's take an assessment. What can you remember? No, we want to make sure that it feels authentic, that it's just a part of the learning process, and doing is a part of the learning process. So when I'm talking about authentic assessments, I'm talking about putting the skills and content knowledge in the real world context. How are students going to use the skills and knowledge that they are learning in the real world?
So let's first just review the types of classroom assessment. So we have formative assessments, and some of you may be familiar with this, and it could just be a great reminder. Some of this might be new for some people. So, formative, we're just gathering information about students' prior knowledge and their understanding throughout the learning process. Formative assessments really guide instruction. These are ongoing, especially important at the very beginning of a unit, of a lesson, but they should be ongoing throughout the day, all the time. We're looking for things and ways to formatively assess our students. Now, summative assessment is different because it's the final evaluation of students' performance. So it summarizes what the students have learned, and it usually occurs at the end of a unit. That's what would make sense. Now, formative assessments, I say it guides instruction because you're going to be fixing things as you collect that data, where summative assessment, it's at the end. So whatever students get, that's the representation of what they know. You're not going to go back and try to fix that and grow that knowledge right away. All right, I'm going to move my little video over here so that we can see these myths about assessments. Now, these are myths that either I had going into education or that I've heard other teachers have, even some students. So, the first myth I wrote is assessments are something you have to do because the curriculum requires you to do them. Now, here's the fact. Assessments are really just a tool to help you get to learn about your students and they inform your instruction. So a lot of the times I hear teachers talk about, like, oh, I have to do this assessment because my administrator says I have to. But really, that's so reverse of why assessments were created in the first place. Assessments were created really to help us understand our students. What do they know? What can they do independently? And it's really meant to guide our instruction, help us figure out what the next steps are for them. So we really should look at assessments in a positive way. How can we use assessments in the best way? Well, I'll give you a clue. Authentic assessments are going to be the best way to really guide our instruction. But we'll continue to get to that. The next myth is that all assessments have to be done on paper with multiple choice or written answers. Now, here's the fact. There are so many different ways that we can assess students, and students should have a variety of options to show their learnings. Raise your hand if you were not the best test taker in school. I will be honest, I struggled so much with taking tests, and it really discouraged me. It made me feel like I wasn't successful as a student, but yet I could apply a lot of things that I was learning into real skills, but I was a horrible test taker. We have to remember that assessments that are not authentic don't show what our students can actually do or what they actually know. And we should give students choices in how to show their skills and their knowledge, because not all students are going to be the best at speaking. Not all students are going to be the best at test taking. Not all students are going to be the best at writing. So we need to create lots of opportunities for students to show what they can do and what they know. Another myth is that assessments only take place at the end of the unit, which, if you just listen to my examples of formative and summative assessments should be ongoing throughout the learning process. As a teacher, it was the only way for me to understand where to go the next day, where to go the next week, was based on my students' formative assessments, my observations of them. We're going to get more detailed into what a formative assessment is, but they should just be conducted often to guide the instruction in the classroom. All right, we're going to start with formative assessment. And I have a video here. I'm just going to show like 1.5 minutes of it. And it's going to give us a little glimpse into formative assessment.
Assessment should occur early and often and throughout the process.
I do a lot of formative assessments. So formative assessments meaning it's not summative, it's not a test at the end of the week or the end of a unit. You're doing a lot of small check-ins with the students to see where they're at and to see that they're growing along.
How do you know that?
Because I read it in the Saturn book.
In the Saturn book, so you're making a
Connection.
from text to
Text.
very good.
They are being steered very gently and very strategically, and the formative assessment gathering process is essential to that. You really have to know what kids know and don't know.
In a lot of cases, we give students written feedback on the paper that they've written, but then we move on to the next thing and we don't give them the opportunity to actually rewrite that paper. And the research evidence is extremely clear that one of the strongest positive influences on achievement occurs when students get formative feedback that they immediately can apply.
I think that's one of the things that the kids don't really like, is doing the reflecting, but I think it's actually one of the things that helps us a lot. I think doing it kind of like helps you see the bigger picture, because I don't think that if I didn't do reflecting, I wouldn't really think about like what I'm struggling with, or I would just kind of want to move on.
All All right, so some of the things that I loved that they talked about in that feedback is that it should be ongoing from the start. And I loved this idea of formative feedback. So, formative assessments are really a powerful tool to check students' understanding of what they're learning while they're still in the learning process, right? So, after we give a summative assessment, we have to move on, right? So, formative assessments are really our tool to give students feedback, to give students support, scaffolding while they're still in the learning process. It's going to guide our instruction as teachers. Now, my favorite thing about formative assessments, they don't always have to be planned. My favorite thing to do, and something that really helped me in my journey as an educator, is to take anecdotal notes. So I had a little clipboard that I would take with me everywhere. And on each sheet, it just had a box for each student's name. And I would write like reading at the top, phonics, math, writing. And for each unit, I would collect notes on each of my students. And it really helped guide me, one, in like, who was I actually meeting with? Am I meeting with all my students? Do I have data on all of my students? And two, what can I get from when students are just having conversations, turn in talks? What information can I get when my students are when I'm conferencing with my students, right? We have so many students most of the time that it can be hard to track that information, to remember that information. But once I laid it out on a clipboard on just a little sheet of paper, it helped me to be able to like find commonalities in my students. Oh my gosh, all of my students are pronouncing the ed endings wrong. So like that's something that's going to inform me to go back and reteach that. Another thing that I love about the formative assessments is they're usually not graded, right? So I would grade them just like little exit tickets only to inform my instruction. So it's like, oh wow, like all of my students scored either a 1 or a 2. I'm not going to put this score in the grade book, but it's just for me to realize that I really need to go back, look at these exit tickets. Where are my students making a common mistake? And then go back and fix that. So I only graded it if I needed to see where my students were at. Now, here are some examples of formative assessments that I have used, that I've seen other teachers using through observations. I'm going to give a little bit of explanation for some of them that might be a little confusing. But otherwise, you can look up all of these. There's lots of videos on these on YouTube or Vimeo to give you some examples of some really cool ways to do this. So first up, we have exit tickets. Usually these are no more than like 5 questions or like 5 tasks. It can be multiple choice. It can be written. It can be super, super quick. Sometimes I cut out like little fourths of a paper, and before a student leaves my small group, I just have them answer 1 or 2 questions. It's just a way for me to see, were they able to understand what I was teaching them in this small group. Another type of formative assessment is student discussions, like I was talking about, when I have students turn and talk, work with their table group. Listening in to how students talk about what they're learning is so powerful, right? Are students able to communicate on their own what they're learning? The next one is low stakes quizzes. Sometimes I feel like these are similar to exit tickets, but they're not graded, less than 10 questions, and they would be specific to content, knowledge, or skill. A quick sketch is something that I love to do, especially with the younger grades. Sometimes if I'm teaching something science related, social studies, it can be easy to just have them like sketch what they've learned, especially if I have them sketch, like we were doing a unit on bees. And I said, sketch a picture of everything you know about bees. And so some students drew bees, on like flowers and things like that. And then we went through a week-long study of bees through a text set. And at the end of the week, I had them draw some more information, or every day I had them draw a little bit more about, add on to their picture about bees, so I could see, is their knowledge growing? What are the things they're actually picking up on? Because they're not going to draw something that they don't really understand about bees. They're going to draw things that are sticking out to them, things that are adding to their knowledge of bees. So that's a great way to just check and see what students are understanding. Another one is think, pair, share, which we're going to be doing today. And I wish I could hear what you guys were talking about so I could inform my instruction in this professional development. But a think, pair, share is when we just have students think about what we're talking about, pair up with someone and share their ideas. And this is where I loved using my anecdotal notes to write little notes about what kids were talking about. Observations is something that I love as well. Sometimes students get really nervous talking or performing in front of us, especially in our small groups. And so I love to use observations during like informal times. During math workshop, if we had a station that was all about like building representations of problems, just observing how students were using them, how students were solving problems, I found was a great authentic way to really see if they were able to apply skills and knowledge. Also doing a poll. There's tons of resources online that you can create online polls to collect some information. Having students do a demonstration. I like to do this in my small group a lot. After we've done some practice, I've done some modeling, and I do, we do. The you do would be a demonstration. And this is where I would be checking for some like, carry over those skills and knowledge. A running record is an awesome way to collect data on students' reading, their decoding skills, their comprehension, and it's so authentic because they're reading real books, right? So I remember when I first got into education, I was asked to do fluency instead of running records. And I was so frustrated because fluency was just like 2 paragraphs of a passage that was so disconnected with what students knew. It wasn't at their reading level. And it was really hard to assess students' reading based on just a fluency passage. So, one thing that I love about running records is that gives kids an authentic, a real book. They can use the pictures, which is one of our strategies in reading, using the pictures to figure out words that you don't know and to help you comprehend the book. And so they were able to use pictures. It was an authentic experience, and we're listening in with them and taking notes about moves that they're making, maybe errors that they're making, and then guiding our instruction from there. Lastly, I love reading and writing conferences. These Carl Anderson, if you do not know who Carl Anderson is, I definitely recommend you looking him up. He has an amazing book on writing conferences. I believe he has 2 now. And it's such an authentic way to really get to know students, where they're at, what they're thinking when they're reading and when they're writing. So just sitting down with them, I think he says 5 to 10 minutes. You do a little research about them. We're actually going to watch a video of Jennifer Saravallo doing this. But researching things that are going well for them, things that they're struggling with, and giving them some tips. So here I've pulled 2 examples. One is a math example, and then one is a reading example. And so we're going to take a look at these, and then we're going to share out with each other about things that we saw. And we're going to start with this first one, this small group.
Last time I didn't get the decimals right. She helped us on the homework part, and she taught us how to do the decimals in an easier way.
And I want you to think right now, how would I say this number?
The teacher head shoes is actually a great time to close those skill gaps and make them proficient and make them successful, which makes everyone happy.
All right, that's a very short snippet. But what I want you to notice is how the student at the beginning said, the last time we were in small group, I didn't get the decimals right. But my teacher helped us on the homework and taught me some more. So now she's trying to teach her students in a visual and a kinesthetic way. So the last time they were at small groups, the student didn't understand it. And now the student is getting it right because her teacher went back, is now trying a different way of showing this information. And her formative assessment at first was just an observation, and now she's going back and reteaching. And again, she's observing her students as well. So now we're going to go to this next one. We're going to watch the whole thing. It's only about 4 minutes. And I want you to think about how this formative assessment might guide her instruction. What might be the next steps that Jennifer Saravallo would do for the student or for her class?
Hey, Julian. So I hear you just finished this book.
Yes.
Yeah, you couldn't wait to tell me you finished. Tell me, what'd you think of it?
It was good.
Okay. What was some of the things you were thinking about toward the end of the book?
Towards the end,
Yeah.
I said, I made a prediction. I said, I predict, well, there's a boys team and a girls team, and they want to see who can talk for the least amount of time. And I predicted that it would be a tie.
Okay.
And my prediction came true. And I made another post-it. How long is this going to go on for? Because it seems
So let me stop you. If we were to think about the very end of the story and the very last thoughts you were having as you finished up this book, what were you thinking about?
Like, in the beginning of the book, the boys and girls weren't really like friends. They weren't communicating well. And at the end, Lindsay, she's like the captain of the girls' team. She was keeping track of everything, and Dave thought she just made it a tie. And I said, but why would Lindsay do that? Because it seems like they've been getting along well.
So it seems like what you're paying attention to as a reader is that across the book, things change, right? In the beginning of the story, the characters might be one way or act one way, and by the end of the story, they might change a lot.
Yeah.
And that's a really important thing to pay attention to, because lots of times the change in a story gives us some clues as to what the story's really about. You know what I mean by that?
Yeah.
I mean, like, what's the lesson or the message that I'm supposed to take away from this book as a reader? How has the character changed? What has the character realized? And therefore, what should I realize as the reader? Can we think about that a little bit together? Okay, what are you thinking?
That, like, boys and girls can get along if they, like, try.
I like how you said that in a way that it's not just about this book, but you might find that in a lot of books.
And, like, general.
It's general, yeah, like boys and girls can get along. Are there any other that come to mind? 'Cause sometimes there's not just one, there's more than one.
Like, not all people are perfect.
What makes you say that?
Because in the beginning of the book, Dave was like, boys can talk less than girls, and they were having like a fight about it. And at the end of the book, I thought that like, well, nobody's really perfect because nobody can talk as much.
So I think what you're doing that's really important is when you're thinking about a lesson or message, it's not just something that happened in one small part of the book, it's something that happened across the book. Maybe at the beginning of the book and the end of the book, or at multiple places in the book. So I don't know about you, Julianne, but every time I finish a book, I always think, I close the book and I think, what did this book teach me? Right? What's the lesson I'm going to take away from this book? I might not remember every single detail in the book, but I can remember and carry with me the big ideas that I have. And that's something you can do in any time you read a story. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so right now, what I want you to do is just stop and think about some of the things that you saw in this video that were formative assessments. Maybe talk about Jennifer Saravallo's use of anecdotal notes. What do you think she was taking notes on? And what do you think the next steps for these teachers would be? Go ahead, you can pause the video. I'm going to go on to the next slide and then resume the video as you are ready. Awesome. One more time, I want you to stop and think about what type of formative assessments are you already doing in your classroom? I'm sure some of you already knew that you were doing some formative assessments, and some of you may have heard my examples and watched that video and was like, oh, wow, I didn't really realize I was already doing these types of formative assessments. So go ahead and share with someone or think about it to yourself. What types of formative assessments are you already doing in your classroom? You can pause the video now and resume when you're ready. We're going to go On to summative assessment now. And this is actually the same video we watched earlier, but now we're going to talk about a little bit more about summative assessment. We're going to see some examples here.
Summative assessment just simply means an assessment from which we can draw a judgment about whether somebody has, at that moment, learned. A false distinction has cropped up in the United States, which seems to suggest that it's okay for external summative assessments to just be multiple choice tests. In other countries, summative assessments that occur periodically are essays and oral examinations and project-based assessments, so that what you're able to see about what students can do reflects more of what you actually want them to be able to do in the world beyond school.
So tonight is exhibit night. Every 9 weeks we have this big celebration of learning, and the halls will be filled with parents and children who are all here to celebrate what their children have accomplished in the past 9 weeks. We also use exhibits to assess the learning of our students. I like to go up to students and have them explain an exhibit to me so that I understand, did they get the big idea? Did they just do a project, or do they really understand what they did, why they did it, and what it means in terms of the bigger picture? What we find is that because the learning is so rich and it's so meaningful, that our students do very well on standardized tests.
All right, so some of the things that I loved that this video was talking about is the bigger picture. Can students just take a test and answer all the questions right? Or can they actually explain and describe why they were learning this, how it relates to the bigger picture, to real life experiences and situations? So when we think about summative assessment, I want to remind you that it summarizes what students have learned, either the skill, the content knowledge, or both. It's usually at the end of the unit, and students should have opportunities for feedback throughout the process. So usually when we give a test, it's just probably 10 to 20 to 30 minutes given on one day, and then we move on. Some teachers choose to show their students the test, their test score afterwards. Maybe some teachers allow students to fix it up, but that's like a very few. Now, when we are doing a summative assessment that is authentic, we want to make sure that we are giving students opportunities throughout the process to receive feedback. And that takes us back to formative assessment. That's why formative and summative assessment are so closely knit together, because they build off of each other. If we don't have formative assessment, then we're not going to have a valid summative assessment, because students wouldn't have any feedback to improve on what they're learning. Now, summative assessments are graded, and one tip is that I would think about how the skill or content would be used in the real world. So whenever you want to create a summative assessment, which we're actually going to be doing today, and I will model first, but we always want to think about, how are my students going to use this skill in the real world? How are they going to use this knowledge in the real world? And the best piece of advice I can give is to give students choices. Not all of our students are going to be the best speakers. And maybe that's not how they're going to best express their knowledge of a content. Now, if you give them choices, then there can be many different ways for your students to express their skills and their content knowledge in the best way for them. I put a note at the bottom of this slide that there are so many kinds of authentic assessments, summative assessments, and there are so many more than are listed here. So these are just a few ideas I have, but there's so many more than this. So don't just think that these are the only ways to have an authentic summative assessment. So First up, we have role play, and this is a really cool one for history. I've also done this for reading comprehension, for hearing about reading expression. So role playing, students can reenact an event from the past to show that they understand what was happening. They can also replay, or they can role play real life scenarios to show how they would use skills or content knowledge in a real world scenario. And they can also role play and reenact part of a story that they read. Like I said, reading with expression, we can hear from that, or just remembering comprehension of that specific part. Another really cool one is to write a news article. So this is great for students who want to express their knowledge through writing and their writing skills. It can be used to inform the community, the school community, their local community about a problem or something that they've learned about and discovered. It can also be a news article written about a past event, history. Next up is a blog post or a website. This is a great way to incorporate current skills, technology skills, and help students understand online platforms and the voice that they can have online. Next up, we have a poster. So we know that this is a creative way for students to show their knowledge. It's especially awesome if they want to express something to their school community or their community. They can post it up around the school. It's a great way to get information out. Through this, you might hear my ideas also about student voice. I think students' voices are so important, and I think it's really important as educators that we tell students that their voice can be a very powerful tool. And just because they're kids doesn't mean that they can't have a huge impact. So a lot of the things that I'm talking about have this underlying idea of using students' voices. So the next one is a PowerPoint presentation. I think this is a great way to incorporate authentic learning, because we know in the real world, in a lot of jobs, we have to present presentations just like I'm doing now, and in other careers as well. So this is a great way for students to learn about how to speak in front of others and to use their creative ideas in PowerPoint. Another idea is an interview. And this is a great way for students to either make up an interview, so how they would think a historical figure would answer or respond to certain questions. It's a really cool and interesting way to do that. Also, if we're thinking about how to make things culturally relevant, we want to bring in parts of students' culture. In some cultures, songs are really, really important and a great way to express ideas. And so a song or a poem, spoken word, are beautiful ways for students to authentically express their content knowledge and their skills. Also another presentation, we have exhibits like we saw in the video, which I think are such great ways to show what students have learned. And also writing a letter to someone, either in the past, writing a letter to someone like in a persuasive way. That's a great way to assess persuasive arguments. So lots of different ideas. These are just a few that I could think of off the top of my head. So here is a few examples in action. I'm going to show you two examples from this specific video, one for younger grades and one for upper grades.
People think that spiders are like scary or dangerous, and actually they're not.
We've been working on our spider stories for quite a while, because they are the way that we're solving our problem.
Why write stories?
It changes people's minds.
And what else can it change?
Their hearts.
Their hearts.
Every student studied their own spider. They did research on all of the attributes of that spider. Then they had to take those facts and create a story around them.
The spider I've been researching is the broad-faced sack spider. My story's about this little spider trying to find a home and how the problems it gets through to find the perfect place to live. Daddy Longlegs.
This writing project is actually helping us learn how to write better because you can look back at your research and then you can know like the facts.
He dove to eat the spider. What I hope that I'm building are like tiny problem solvers.
There was a spitting spider.
It's a really appropriate way for them to practice those lifelong skills.
The bird didn't see him, so he went past the end.
When I think about how to identify a quality problem, I think about what is the authentic context that I can situate that problem within. Our school's called Two Rivers, and one of those two rivers is the Anacostia that is not swimmable or fishable.
Our website needs to teach kids all about the river ecosystem, both its problems and how we can make it healthy again.
And so they're creating a website.
So start to think about this third question. What changes can we make to improve?
We get to teach kids about the Anacostia and what makes the ecosystem healthy.
Partnering with the Anacostia Watershed Society is giving kids the idea that this is a real-world connection.
We work with Two Rivers. The students are really taking part in an authentic restoration project.
I like that the topic isn't taught to you. You have to like figure stuff out. We go on field studies so we can see what it actually looks like.
Then solutions like rain barrels, wetland plants.
It's not that we're looking at, what's happening with the rainforest. Everything that they do every day is impacting the water.
Zoom in, zoom in.
It's much more powerful for them to be involved in something that's part of their own community.
All right, so some amazing examples are in that video. Just something that really sticks out to me is how authentic this is to the students' world and their community, especially in that last example with the rivers. Well, actually both of them, because spiders are all around us too. So with the river, it's exactly in their community, right? She said, we're not learning about the rainforest. The students have never experienced that, but we're problem solving about things that are in our community. And I love how both examples are really showing that students' voices are important and should be used. So now I want us to stop and think once again, what types of summative assessments are you using in your classroom? And it's okay to be honest. I've been a teacher and I know that I have used multiple choice questions. I've used end of the unit exams. So it's okay to be honest. We want to be honest with ourselves. What types of summative assessments are you using in your classroom? Please stop this video, and then when you're ready to continue, you can start it back up again. All right, welcome back. Now we're going to dig a little bit deeper into why should we use authentic assessments? Why should we really focus on using these authentic assessments in our classroom? And I have one last clip I want to show you from this video that we have been watching.
Kids have that opportunity. They begin to value assessment. Assessment is, for me, as a way to get the feedback that allows me to become the person I want to be. If we do this well, the kind of learner we should produce is someone who is self-initiating and self-motivated, understands the standards internally, and is continually driving towards excellence, is continually developing their own learning skills, and is able ultimately to learn on their own, independently and collaboratively with others in a world that is going to be very unpredictable, and in which those learning skills are going to be the most important determinant of success.
All right, so some of the things that I heard in this end part of the video was that assessment is for the students and they can internalize that. And these authentic assessments can create independent learners and collaborative learners. So I want you to stop right now and turn and talk or think to yourself and respond to what you heard in this part of the video. You can pause the video and then come back on once you're ready. Welcome back again. So now we are really diving into, but really, why do we need to do authentic classroom assessments? Why should we take the time out of our already busy schedules to create authentic assessments? Because it does take time. It does take a lot of thought, which I'm sure you've seen as you've watched these videos. And are generic assessments really harmful for kids, or can I just keep using them? These are great questions. These are very valid questions, questions that I've asked myself, questions that I've had other teachers ask me. So we're going to dive into those really important questions right now. And I'm going to move myself over here so that we can see everything that we need to. So looking at this visual, it's clear that there are a lot more pros to authentic assessments than there are cons. I'm going to start with the cons. It does take a little bit more time and effort to think of different ways to assess students, and instead of giving the generic assessments. And it doesn't give us data that we can compare so that we can compare students globally, which is why we have the other assessments that we use in school, whether it's MAP assessments, SBAC assessments, whatever assessments that you use as a school-wide assessment. Those are so that you can compare over time and by students globally. And usually authentic assessments don't have that kind of data to be able to compare across the globe. But here are the pros. Now, you can read this slide on your own, so I'm going to summarize for you. But authentic classroom assessments allow students to apply the learned skills and the content knowledge in real-world contexts. So it enables them to become real-world problem solvers, real-world critical thinkers. And it allows all types of learners to be successful because they can show their knowledge and skills in different ways. I think it also allows students to really deepen their understanding of a content knowledge or the skills that they're learning, because we don't just cover a whole bunch of things and then have to like just rote memorization and recite the information. We're actually using the skills and building the knowledge as we go throughout the learning process. So there's so many positives to using authentic classroom assessments in the classroom. Now we're going to get into some practice. We're going to do a little bit of I do, we do, you do. So first, we're going to have a little quiz for you, and I'm going to move myself once again. So you are teaching students about how to count money. An authentic assessment would be, I want you to pick one. Would an authentic assessment be, number one, having students take turns acting as store owners and buyers and using money to purchase items? Or would an authentic assessment be having students answer word problems related to money? I'll give you some time to think. Awesome. So number one is definitely an authentic assessment, and let me tell you why. When we're teaching students about counting money, why would students need to know that? How do students use that in the real world? Well, if they want to buy something, they're going to need to count out their money to make sure they have enough of it in order to purchase it. And as a store owner, if we're store owners, right, we need to count money to make sure we get enough. So that's an authentic way to assess students' knowledge on counting money. Now, some of you may say, but the second one doesn't sound that bad either. I mean, at least the word problems are talking about money. Yes, but if you want to make it even more authentic, we need to connect it to real world context, real world skills. I know my first and second graders would go to the grocery store and pick out pieces of candy and use their money. I know that my kids are already doing that. So I might as well challenge or push my students in the direction of context that they're already in. So if I'm teaching about money and I know my students are already, going to the ice cream truck and paying for ice cream, or going to the stores and buying food or candy, they're counting money. And so I just want to use that in an authentic way to assess my students' skills. The next one says you are teaching students how to read with expression. An authentic assessment would be, number one, give students a passage from a text and have them answer a multiple choice question about how the passage should be read. Or number two, students perform in a reader's theater. I'll give you a few seconds to think about. All right, so my response would be number two. Students performing in a reader's theater would be an authentic assessment of if students can read with expression. So I thought about, when do I want kids to be able to read with expression? Why would I want kids to be able to read with expression? Oh, if they're conducting a read aloud, or if they are performing in a reader's theater, we want students to be able to read with expression. So that would be an authentic way to use that skill. If we give students a passage that's first out of context, and two, just ask them how they would read it, maybe they would see that there was a question mark, and so they should have to read it in a little bit of a different way. Or maybe they would see that there was an exclamation point and that they would have to read it with expression. But it's not showing me if students can actually apply the skills and the knowledge that I want. That is the key for these authentic assessments. Is it showing me that students can apply these skills in a real world context? The next one says you are teaching students about animal habitats. An authentic assessment would be, one, have students answer questions, multiple choice questions about different animal habitats, or have students build animal habitat exhibits that include animals and plants specific to that habitat. I'll give you a few seconds to decide. Awesome. So number two, building animal habitat exhibits would be a great authentic assessment. This is something that I've actually done in my classroom. After we've explored different kinds of animal habitats, students were able to choose whichever one was their favorite, and they were able to actually build those habitats in our classroom with tools that I brought in and tools that they brought in from home, which included animals, it included plants that lived there. For the rainforest, it had the different layers of the rainforest, and the students were able to talk to people who came in to look at the exhibits and explain about that habitat. And that was really able to show me that they actually could apply the knowledge that they were learning. Now, if we just have them answer multiple choice questions about the habitats, it's not giving me the real world context. It's not actually applying. Whenever I think of authentic assessments, the key for me is what can students do? So if you're struggling thinking about, I don't know, this is seeming a little bit confusing. Whenever I think of authentic assessments, think of what can students do? The actual action. All right, I don't believe my video is in the way. Here we go. So this slide may look intimidating, but I'm going to walk us through this. How do we create these authentic classroom assessments? This is just kind of my thinking behind creating authentic classroom assessments. Whenever I'm trying to sit down and create an authentic classroom assessment, I think about these things, and I'm going to walk you through that right now. We're going to start over here. Identify the specific skill or skills that you are trying to assess. Really get to the root of what you are trying to teach. Are you trying to assess the skill of measuring something? Are you trying to assess the skill of counting, patterning? Are you trying to assess if students know what happened in the Civil War? Define and identify the specific skill that you are trying to assess. It's going to help you narrow down what you're going to be doing. Next, I like to think about how to allow students to do the skill or use the knowledge. So, what can I actually have students do so that they'll be using the skill that we've taught? Or how can I actually have students use the content knowledge? Next, I like to identify how the skills or the content knowledge will be assessed based on the context it was taught. This is especially important for younger children because we know that young children learn concrete to abstract. Actually, most children do. So we want to make sure that we're presenting information concretely and then building into this abstract. But if we're teaching something one way, we don't want to completely assess it in a new way. We want it all to be connected. So, based on the baking, if I'm teaching about the baking ganache, like we watched at the very beginning, I don't want to assess it in a completely different context where I'm like talking about cooking spaghetti because that doesn't make sense. That doesn't connect. That's not how I taught it. So we want to make sure it's still in the same context as we taught it. Next, it's a great idea to think about how we can give students choice. Can students present their knowledge in different ways? I've seen bingo cards where students can select different ways to complete their assessment and in whatever way works best for them. So how can we give students choices? Next, think about how students will get feedback and opportunities to improve throughout the assessment process. When we were looking at the video that talked about the spiders, writing the spider story, you saw the teacher sitting down with one of the students and actually doing some vocabulary work with her as a formative assessment. She must have seen earlier that she was struggling with that. So then she was giving her some support. She was scaffolding the learning for that student. So how can we give students feedback and opportunities to improve throughout the process of assessment? Next, we want to think about how you will assess students' different ways of showing their knowledge and skills in an equitable way. This is one challenge. If you do allow your students to have choices of assessment, then we really need to think about how are we going to make sure that I'm assessing this in an equitable way, right? Equitable, equality, and equal is not the same thing. So we don't have to have the same rubric for every type of assessment that students choose, but how can we make sure that it's equitable? That's why we come back to here. Identify the specific skill or skills that you are trying to assess so you really, really know what you're looking for because we can show our skills in many different ways. Up here it says, think about how to make it realistic in the context of students' environments. So really think about the students' environments. This is going to be different from school to school. I work in a low-income school and are in an inner city. And so our context, our environment is going to be different. So I'm going to have different examples and experiences than a teacher who teaches in a suburban area. So think about how to make it realistic in the context of students' environments. Take a drive around the community and think about things that stick out to you. Like we watched in the river video, it was saying that river was right there in their community. It's the students' environments. It's in the context of the students' environment. So they used that as an example because it's relevant to the students. Lastly, we want to think about how individuals use the skills or knowledge in real life. And this is what we keep coming back to. How are my kids going to use this skill in the real world? How are my kids going to use this knowledge in the real world? Why is it so important that they know this stuff? That's where we want to guide our assessments. Right now, we're going to go into a model. This is something that I have created and I'm going to walk you through. I thought about all these things, and now I've created this model for creating an authentic assessment. So the standards I'm going to be using today are second grade standards for math. First, it's measure the length of an object by selecting and using appropriate tools. And then the next one is measure to determine how much longer one object is than another, expressing the length difference in terms of standard length unit. So I first start by identifying the skills and content knowledge I want my students to know. That's one, can they measure? Can they read the measurements? And can they find the difference? Okay, so these are the skills that I'm really focusing on assessing. Now, I thought about who does this in the real world? When would my students ever do this? Well, we have contractors, right? If you've ever had work done on your house, that you know that contractors are constantly measuring things to make sure that they can map out the layout so that everything fits. Also, construction workers, whenever they're building, it's very important that they have the correct measurements so things stay in place and that they are level. Also, interior designers, when they're designing rooms, they have to measure the whole room and then measure each thing that they want to put inside to make sure that it's going to fit in the space. I think of medical personnel. I think of like dentists who measure like teeth, or if there's like you need an x-ray and you need to get a bone measured. This is like a really exciting thing for kids to look at x-rays and how doctors measure things. So that's a really cool way to add in this real world application. Also, seamstresses and tailors, they need to measure things. If you've ever gotten something tailored before, you have to know your measurements, how much you want cut off, how much you want added. Also, referees and officials, if you've ever seen the long jump, right? They have to measure to know where someone started, the length from where someone started to where they ended. So I just brainstorm all of these different ways that students are going to use measuring in the real world. And then I just select one of them to really focus on. For my formative assessment, I would just observe students measuring things around the classroom, prompting them to compare the lengths of two things as they measured, and I would be taking a lot of anecdotal notes. I could even do an exit ticket, go measure the door and measure the bookshelf and tell me which one is longer and by how much. So those are just some simple ways that you can do a formative assessment. Formative assessments don't have to be like this huge production. They can be super, remember, I said they don't even have to be planned, right? If I had students observing, or if I had students measuring things in the classroom, I can just jump right in and start doing a formative assessment, just watching them do that skill. Okay. Now for the summative assessments, there's so many options, as I said before, but this was what I thought of, something that I've actually had my students doing. There's an organization called Project Linus, and they give blankets to students or to kids who are sick in the hospital. And so for my summative assessment, I told the kids that we are going to be helping out an organization called Project Linus, and we need to measure out fabric sizes so that we can make blankets for the kids in the hospital. So measuring the length of ourselves as kids, adding out some extra measurements to make sure that we have the correct measurements for the fabric to make the blankets. I could have used so many different examples of this as well, but I thought this was a great one that gets kids really involved. It gets them excited. They have a purpose because they know that these blankets are going to be going to kids who are sick in the hospital, which is, who wouldn't want to do that? And it also is cool because once they measure and they have their measurements down, then we would actually bring in the fabric and they would see, oh man, are my measurements correct? Do I need to fix them? Do I need to go back and can I give, as a teacher, some feedback to students to help them fix their measurements and then actually create this blanket? So it has a real world context and it has a real product aligned with it. So we're going to try it together. I've selected a standard, and my hope for you, once again, my hope for you is that you're not doing this alone, but you're doing this in a community of other educators. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up the next slide. And I want you to pause and take time to walk through the steps that I just did. You can even rewind to the how do we create authentic classroom assessment slide that had all the ideas of things that were in the thought process. And I want you to brainstorm some of the ideas that go in each box. Think of a formative assessment and a summative assessment with your learning community. And I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say. So here is our example. This is our standard. It's a reading standard for 4th grade. Interpret information presented visually, orally, and quantitatively. So charts, graphs, diagrams, timelines, animations, or interactive elements on the web pages, and explain how the information contributes to an understanding of the text in which it appears. Okay? So go ahead, think about the specific skills or content knowledge that your students would need to know to be able to do this. The real world application, who actually interprets charts, diagrams, graphs, timelines? Who does that in the real world? What's a formative assessment that we could do? And then what would be your summative assessment? You can pause the video now. Okay, so welcome back. I hope that you were able to do that in a learning community and that you were able to talk about some different ideas. I love doing this with a learning community because it gives me so many other ideas when I hear other people thinking of new ways that you could learn and you could use this skill in the real world context. Just gives me so many more ideas about summative and formative assessment. So now we're going to try this on our own in the real context. So this is kind of my summative assessment to see if you can actually apply the skills and the knowledge that I have been teaching you throughout this professional development in your context. So I want you to find or identify 1 or 2 skills or standards that you will be teaching this semester. I want you to think about how students will use this standard or skill in the real world. And then I want you to plan an authentic classroom assessment, formative and hopefully summative assessment. You should be able to get to both if you have enough time. So you can rewind back to this slide that has this little chart so that you can refer to this as you are working through your own example. And whenever you are ready, you can press play and we just have a few more slides to go. Welcome back. I hope that was a really helpful experience for you to try this with your own standards that you know that you're going to be teaching this year. And if you didn't already share with your learning community, I would love for you to do that either now if you want to pause the video or after the end of this professional development presentation, because it's so cool to hear what other people have to think. Also, feel free to email me your ideas. If you have any more questions, please feel free to email me and reach out to me. I would love to hear your ideas and your questions. We have a few takeaways, things that I want you to remember before I end this presentation. First of all, I want you to know that classroom assessments are critical if we want a full understanding of what our students know and what they can do. Authentic assessments must directly connect the skills or content knowledge with real life application. So anytime we say that we're doing an authentic assessment, we need to make sure that the skills or the knowledge is directly being connected with the real life application. Finally, that authentic assessments help create individuals who are self-initiated, critical thinkers, and problem solvers. Thank you so much for joining me today and watching this professional development on authentic classroom assessments. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I would love to hear your feedback on this professional development and things that you would like to learn more about. Have a wonderful rest of your day.